There's been a mass exodus of conservatives from California, and guess where they are landing? They're landing in Nashville. My next guest is someone who is a rising conservative. In fact, he's already risen. You will recognize this young man, and he will hold you speechless. Welcome to another episode of Conversations. This is the show where we talk about anything and everything, so you will want to stay tuned. My next guest is Michael Knowles. You may know him from the Prager Book Club or the Daily Wire. He's one of the young conservatives, the many conservatives. In fact, there's some old conservatives who have moved from California to Nashville. So, Michael, welcome.
Carol, thank you for having me. It's good to be with you on the show, and frankly, even better to be with you in a sensible state like Tennessee.
You're kidding. Have you been? You're in Nashville.
Well, that's the caveat. That's the slight caveat.
Nashville and Memphis, not sensible.
Right.
But with so many conservatives coming to Nashville, I think we might be able to take the city for the first time. We can't take it back, but we might be able to transform it.
That's the hope. I think the last time I saw you was in California, and it was right before we were all leaving. And I think the number one destination for people, and it's all conservatives leaving, the number one destination was Nashville.
We prayed y'all up.
Yeah, I am
We're
really...
in the Bible Belt. We prayed.
Yeah, well, clearly the prayers worked. They were answered, and it was really terrific. And it's not only conservatives leaving California, but it's people, I think, who in any way break the leftist orthodoxy.
Well, wait a minute. You're on the tail end, and we have a lot of liberals that came first from California and New York. They're here, but then we have this mass gathering of conservatives, and I'm excited. It's been lonely here.
No, it is good. You were certainly one of the draws, and when we came here, part of the reason for it is...
What's to save Tennessee?
To save Tennessee,
right.
Or Nashville maybe. But one of the real draws, though, is it used to be that if you were to be in the media, if you were to write, if you were to go on TV, you had to be in certain cities, and now, because of the growth of alternative media platforms like this, like other places, you can do it from elsewhere. And then there's this threat from big tech who, in some ways they kind of let conservatives have another voice, and now they're trying to shut us all down
because
again.
We were so darn effective.
That's why.
Elected Donald Trump in 2016, and they're definitely trying to shut us down.
Yeah.
Will it work?
Well, not to be a downer, but it is working right now. If you can have an oligarch billionaire in Silicon Valley who looks like hipster Rasputin, this guy Jack Dorsey, if you can have him censor the duly elected sitting president of the United States.
We knew that was coming.
We knew it was coming. I mean, well, you knew it was coming. I don't know that everybody knew it was coming, but you called it years ago. If you can do that, then you can censor anybody. They try to take us offline almost every single day. And then even just recently, you had Amazon, the big store, right, the everything store in the world. They used to take off politically incorrect materials. If the Confederate flag is very hot one week, they'll take that off, or some other. Meanwhile, they would keep Mein Kampf on
and how
Amazon.
to build a bomb in your basement.
That's right, anarchists' guides. But just recently, they took away the exception for books. Now they are banning books. This guy Ryan T. Anderson, who's a friend.
I know him very well.
Yeah, you know Ryan, a friend of mine. Ryan's at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. He was at Heritage. He's just a kind of scholar writing about one of the funniest titles I've ever read, When Harry Became Sally. And he was writing about this transgender ideology. Secretly, Amazon just took it off the website. That's hate speech now. You're not allowed to have it. So the question for us who write books, who speak, who try to push a conservative message, how can we hope to get our message out if a handful of oligarchs are controlling the flow of information around the internet?
The thing that really worries me is that I'm invested in mutual funds, and I might own some Amazon.
Yeah.
And Amazon has set up a system, that's so easy to use, and it's just we need alternatives to the Amazons, and I think there are conservatives that are working on the alternatives, and maybe we needed this.
Yeah.
And so even though it seems like the worst thing in my life, and I'm looking from a vantage point, much further removed from yours, things that seem terrible turn out really well. And so I think that if we come up with our own alternatives, that would be far better than being dependent on people who hate your guts.
This is a hopeful outlook because chaos and adversity does breed opportunity if you know how to take it. And it is true. A lot of conservatives, I think, don't realize this is the fight. Every generation has a fight. Some people have to storm Normandy, right? But this is the fight right now, where you have this extraordinarily censorious, radical left wing accumulating a ton of power. And it's not just big government anymore. It involves big government, but it's universities, it's big tech, it's corporate America, which is frankly leading the charge on this radical subversion and leftism. And it's incumbent on us to stand up. And I think a lot of people, unfortunately, are a little squishy, and they want to go along to get along and hope that they won't be booted. But this is the moment. Either you stand up now or you will lose your voice.
I agree, and I watched the transformation of universities over the past 30 years.
Yep.
And it seemed like the changes happened rapidly, but they really didn't. And a lot of the people, they were getting their degrees in the studies program, Black studies, women's studies, LGBT studies, Chicano studies. We were wondering where they were going to get a job. Well, they got jobs. They became diversity, equity, inclusion officers. They took their ideas all across America. And they've been able to shut down things like we laughed at snowflakes and political correctness, and we said, wait until they get into the real world, they'll learn. And the joke was on us.
We learned.
We did.
They didn't have to learn. We learned because they took over these institutions. This is, as you alluded to in your very kind introduction, this is the topic of this book I wrote, Speechless. As you imply, there's a line from Hemingway, which is, he's asking in Sun Also Rises, how did you go bankrupt? And the answer is, gradually, then suddenly.
Right, that's what happened with the universities.
We're in the suddenly phase right now, I think.
But again, I'm encouraged because there's so many of us, the left came up with the word woke.
Yeah.
We're woke now.
Yeah.
And we see it, and I just have to believe that even among the political left, when you have classical liberals, they are usually not on board with this.
Right. Right, that's true. And what's interesting about the woke term on the left is there's this analog on the right where some people say I'm red-pilled, from the Matrix, right? Where you say, I took the red pill and now... And both of those phrases describe the same phenomenon, basically waking up from this kind of dream-like state and seeing reality a little more closely. This, I think, is... When you say this has been going on at the universities for a long time, it's what I think conservatives have not understood about political correctness. I think this has been building not just for 20, 30 years, it's been building for about 100 years through the subversion of radicals, people like Antonio Gramsci, the Italian communist theorist, the Frankfurt School, critical theory, right? It goes all the way up to the present. But now we're seeing the flowering of this. And to me, it presents a trap that conservatives fall into.
I want to talk more about that after our break because, like I have my own awakening to the cultural Marxism and how dangerous, it became, but I was asleep for a long time. We'll be back after this message from our sponsors.
Conversations with Dr. Carol Swain is made possible by Cooper Steel, a family-owned business that provides the steel fabrications for some of the greatest buildings across the United States. 60 years ago, Kenneth and Faye Cooper founded their company in Shelbyville, Tennessee.
Cooper Steel believes in sponsoring Carol Swain because we believe as she does, you build strong, you stand strong.
What started as a vision and now a nationally recognized and operated company that remains true to its founders' Judeo-Christian values and principles. Cooper Steel is committed to excellence, responsibility, and community. Cooper Steel's motto is, build strong, stand strong. They treat their employees and customers like family. Thank you to Cooper Steel for Standing Strong with Conversations with Dr. Carol Swain. Learn more about our generous sponsor at coopersteel.com.
I'm back with my guest, Michael Knowles. Michael, we were talking about moving towards cultural Marxism, and like Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals, like that's a book that I think everyone on the right needs to read. You know, once you get past the dedication to Lucifer, there's information in there I think that would be of value to conservatives.
I'm so glad you bring up both of these things, because if you mention that Saul Alinsky acknowledges Lucifer at the beginning of his book, people will tell you that's a lie, that's a conspiracy theory.
Well, yeah,
I have the book. I can read it to you.
I know, but that's what the fact checkers, they will say that.
They will say that, and you know what they'll say about cultural Marxism? They'll say
it doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. It's an anti-Semitic conspiracy theory. And the thing is, I've read all of these
Well, let me
guys.
tell you this. They only started doing that about 5 years ago because I've been studying it for maybe 10.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, Google, anytime you put in cultural Marxism, it came up that it didn't exist, and you know that's fake and
somehow anti-Semitic. And what's so strange is there are many Marxist theorizers, influential professors who, for instance, Herbert Marcuse, who becomes the father of the New Left in the 1960s, who explicitly state, we are Marxists, and we realize that Marx's class revolution failed because the Marxists failed to achieve cultural hegemony, which is a phrase of Antonio Gramsci, and so now we need to fight on this cultural front, infiltrate the institutions. But what's so strange about the anti-Semitism charge to me is the sort of founding philosopher of all this is an Italian guy. He's not even Jewish. He's an Italian guy.
Well, you should know. You're an Italian.
Yeah, I'm an Italian. I've read these guys. You know, I've read the Italian. And so this process began a long time ago in the 1920s. And it then is developed through the Frankfurt School. They develop critical theory. Critical theory has come up recently, critical race theory, all the studies departments you mentioned.
I know.
A simple way to think about critical theory, of course, is what's the theory? To criticize.
Right.
You criticize
That's
the culture.
good.
Yeah, and Marx actually wrote about this in a letter to Arnold Rouge, I think, which is he called for, quote, the ruthless criticism of all that exists.
Well, that's what they do. And,
that's what they do.
And, you know, Herbert Marcuse wrote an essay in 1965, Repressive Tolerance.
Repressive Tolerance.
And that's what big tech and the mainstream news media, everything that's playing out to shut down conservatives, it's the repressive tolerance in action.
You know, I recommend, just as you say conservatives should read Alinsky, every conservative should read Herbert Marcuse and Repressive Tolerance, because I think he's actually making a very important point. This, to me, is the whole trick of political correctness, which develops from this. It's kind of the thesis of my book, which is political correctness lays a trap for conservatives.
Right.
It's this totally negative, critical campaign to overturn the old moral standards and replace them with speech standards and speech codes. And conservatives react one of two ways, I notice. Either they go squishy and they acquiesce and they use PC language and they give in to PC.
I hate that.
It drives me completely insane. Or the other way they react is they say, well, I don't want any standards at all. I'm an absolutist on free speech or something. I don't think you should be able to do and say absolutely whatever you want. And obviously, we're probably a little more in that camp anyway. But either way, the left gets what they want, because what the left was aiming at is overturning the old, traditional American way of life, standards that we all cherish. And so I think this is why conservatives, any way we fight PC, we've been losing ground for at least 3 or 4 decades. Really, I think it's more like a century at this point.
Well, you know, what I find so interesting is how they used the First Amendment, and those of us, you know, who have believed in free speech, we gave them speech, and they were welcomed on the college and university campuses. And following Saul Alinsky, they infiltrated, they manipulated, they deceived. When they got a critical mass, they took over.
That's right. That's right. Well, you think about in the 1960s, you had the free speech movement at Berkeley. Now, in the 2020, you have Berkeley shutting down the entire campus just because Ann Coulter or Ben Shapiro or somebody's going to come give a speech. So it seems like an inversion. But for them, the call for free speech, they were never talking about free speech in the American tradition.
No, they weren't.
It was a means to an end to instill their own extraordinarily censorious new politically correct standards.
I want to try an idea out on you. A lot of times I encourage young people, certainly to read Saul Alinsky, but I say that what we should do is pretty much, I can't advocate deception, but we need to infiltrate their organizations. That some people can keep their heads down low, like people that, like you and me, we talk. So we can't do that, but we can go inside institutions, we can keep our heads down low, we can wait until we get position, we can hire people like us, and we can get a critical mass. And I think that you can use the same tactics they use to gain control and maybe regain some ground.
This word, position, is the key. And it's something Antonio Gramsci, the Italian communist, wrote about. There are two kinds of wars, in real war and also in politics. There are wars of maneuver, kind of, you just advance and you retreat. And there are wars of position. And the war of position is what you might call the long march through the institutions.
Wasn't that effective?
It's extraordinarily effective.
Yeah.
And now, it took the left 50 to 100 years to accomplish this. So I think conservatives are crazy if we think we're going to reverse all of that overnight. But I think you're absolutely right. The only way to begin to push back is to gain position in these institutions and then transform them, I think, for the better.
What really worries me is that they're inside the church, they're inside the Supreme Court, they're inside every agency of government. They have the Congress. It just seems like America as we know it, that maybe we've lost that.
Well, there is a kind of irony to this. The left always talks about institutional racism or institutional bigotry. And you'll say, well, hold on, they control big tech, the administrative state, the universities, the church,
Supreme Court now.
Supreme Court, all this. If there is institutional racism, wouldn't that be their fault? Aren't they the institutions now? But I see your point, that the sheer amount of institutional power that they have is absolutely daunting.
Well, it concerns me, but I'm not ready to give up on America. I'm not ready to give up on the fight. I'm encouraged by young people like you and the ones that I see that are out there, and they're fighting harder than their parents and our leaders. And so after this break, I want to talk more with you, and especially about your book. We'll be back in a moment.
Dr. Carol Swain's Be the People, a call to reclaim America's faith and promise, newly released in paperback and audio with a new introduction, is a challenge to all Americans. If you are serious about being the best citizen you can be, this is the book for you. From addressing moral relativism to reclaiming the future, you'll understand why Dr. Swain is one of the most relevant voices in today's culture war. Are you ready to reclaim America's faith and promise? Purchase at bethepeoplenews.com/books or wherever books are sold.
The Biden administration's executive order on immigration brings to the forefront one of the most volatile issues of our time. In this timely second edition of Debating Immigration, I join my voice to that of other experts to provide you with facts and information that will help you understand what is at stake for our nation. This edition offers 21 original essays that cover race, religion, economics, human smuggling, and civil rights.
Purchase at bethepeoplenews.com/books or wherever books are sold.
I'm back with my guest, Michael Knowles. Michael, in the time remaining, tell us about your new book.
Well, the book, coincidentally, is about everything we've just been talking about. It's called Speechless: Controlling Words, Controlling Minds. And the book is a full history, I think a 100-year history of political correctness. I don't think there's been a really fully fleshed out history of this. And I think part of the reason we lose is because we don't understand what we're dealing with. What I'm trying to do in the book is take seriously the arguments that the left is making for political correctness. And I actually came to the conclusion that we think that conservatives, understand free speech much better than the left does. But I think they understand it better than we do.
I think so. I think we take it for granted. We quote the First Amendment and we take it for granted, but we don't necessarily understand it.
That's right. Because they understand it, that's how they're able to subvert this. And I think that in order for conservatives to really fight back against this, we need to recognize that free speech is not just something in the abstract. It doesn't just float in the air. Free speech is a real practical tradition that we've had in America for a very long time. And it is not enough for conservatives just to defend free speech or just to defend religious liberty. We have to have something to say. We have to have something that we believe. You know, speech is not totally limitless. If we live in a country where a man is a man, and a woman is a woman, and a man can't become a woman.
That's controversial.
You could get canceled. I actually was attacked at a speech at the University of Missouri for saying that. That was the topic of my speech, is men are not women. Unbelievable that we live in this world now. But if you live in that world, then you can't live in the world where men can become women and women can become men. You know, words have to mean something, and they have to refer to objective reality. And so I think conservatives need to grow a spine.
How do you respond when someone says there's no objective reality, there's no truth, and so they reject everything you say?
Well, what I usually say to them is, okay, I grant your point. There is no objective truth whatsoever. So therefore, I cannot trust the objective truth of your statement that there is no such thing as objective truth. And they're usually a little confused by this, but it's funny because that statement defeats itself. If you make any sort of claim, you are making a truth claim. And so I just think if we're going to push back against political correctness, what that needs to begin with is the simple recognition that we have a moral conscience and we have faculties of reason. And, you know...
Well, some of us do.
Some of us do. And some of us abuse those faculties,
right.
Actually. But I think we can more or less separate right from wrong, good from bad. We have to do it. That's what it means to be in politics, what it means to be human. And if we can start to do that, we can start to articulate a coherent political vision. And then we won't just be complaining about, you know, the new speech codes from the left. We will be articulating something that we actually want to say. We will be speaking what they might call truth to power. And I think that's the only way we're going to crack this speech regime.
They need to stop talking about truth to power because they argue there's no truth. And
they are the power.
Yeah, and so it's so ridiculous what we see taking place.
That radical subjectivism, that radical relativism that they have. You know, there were some debates, even some so-called conservatives defended this. They defended drag queen story hour, where you'd get these people twerking for toddlers.
Even in North Carolina, even in parts of the South, it's taking place, and I wouldn't be surprised if it hasn't happened in your adopted city of Nashville.
I actually wouldn't be surprised either, because we're now at a place where we're told, well, hey, we can't make any distinction. Twerking for toddlers at a public library, look, if some people think that's good, some people think that's bad, but if we say that that's no good and maybe we shouldn't do it, they might tell us we can't go to church. And what I say to them is, they're already telling us we can't go to church.
They definitely
are.
They
closed it for a year. So I just think we need to get over this wimpiness, and we need to be able to articulate a vision and say, you know, I think this thing is better than that thing. And I think waving the American flag is better than waving the Antifa flag. And we need to stand up and have the courage of our convictions.
Now, Michael, you have a newborn.
I do.
Simon, and he's motivating you to fight for America. What do you think parents, if they look at what the political left, they're pushing now to sort of decriminalize pedophilia, and they've had that vision for a long time. Do you believe that to the extent that they keep pushing in that direction, that it enlarges the camp of people who say we've gone far enough?
I do think that has done it, and I think that the gender movement, you know, teaching kids that little boys can be little girls, I think that's true. And people are going to tell you, by the way, Carol, they're going to say, the left isn't pushing to do any of that stuff. California just passed a law, in part decriminalizing pederasty. This is happening in real time. And so I think a lot of people are leaving this kind of comfortable liberalism, leaving the Democratic Party, because they realize this is simply too much. But as that happens, I think that the imposition is going to become much more pronounced. You know, we've always kind of pointed out on the right that their theories don't make sense. They support feminism because women are women and they've got to stand up to men. But they support gender ideology because men and women aren't different at all, and one can become the other. The contradiction is the point. George Orwell writes about this in 1984. He says,
yeah, that's another book I recommend everyone read or reread, because if you read it 20 years ago, it's going to seem very different today when you actually see it being played out in real time.
It is. I mean, just even the concept of newspeak, that is political correctness. And doublethink is this idea that you can have contradictory ideas in your head at the same time.
Pulling down the statues.
Yes.
And, they are actually revising history right before our eyes. Cultural Marxism, it doesn't exist. And we can go down the list of things that if you do a fact check, doesn't exist.
And you'd find it'll be scrubbed from the internet, much like what happens in that book. What they are doing is they're not making an argument, they're not trying to persuade you of something, they are simply imposing their will on you. And I do think some people are waking up to that, but it doesn't matter. The more they wake up, the more strenuous the imposition is going to get.
Well, what really worries me is that if you look at what happened in Nazi Germany, the American people, the way we kind of rolled over for coronavirus, rather than maybe handling it the way we would have in the past, I don't have a lot of confidence, because I see these situations where people were denied access to their loved ones in nursing homes and hospitals. Those people died alone. Yep. To me, that's anti-American, that you would leave your loved ones to die alone. In the past, they would have given you a gown, they would have given you a mask, they would have sterilized everything, but you would have been able to be with your loved ones. Yeah. We have rolled over and we've not pushed back. So it just seems like that the left understands the American people and how far they can go with human nature than we do as people who see ourselves as principled with values. It seems like It's not a fair match.
They have succeeded in many ways at demoralizing us and discouraging us, and the fact that we rolled over for the COVID nonsense is a good example of that. So I do think it reminds conservatives that word discourage means to take out the heart, right?
Well, we are in the election. Every institution kind of failed us in various states when people started questioning the election. So that was very concerning.
Pennsylvania, they violated their own state constitution in the way that they conducted the election. So there were all of these irregularities. And I just think the left has succeeded in many ways at discouraging us. But courage, which is part of that word, courage is a virtue, and it's the prerequisite for all the other virtues. And I think conservatives need to remember that, or learn that again.
Well, thank you so much for being a guest on Conversations, and I'm looking forward to reading your book. In fact, I think I'd like an advance copy of your book.
I can make that happen. Thank you.
And I would love to have you as a guest again.
That'd be great. Thank you for having me.
We'll be back in a moment.
For those of you who would like to know what exactly our children are facing in their education system, this is a must-read book. It will equip you and prepare you to make decisions about your child's health, about your child's education. So I want to encourage every one of you to grab a copy of Dr. Swain's book and join with me and Carol on the front lines in this critical time to eradicate the liberal abduction of our children.
If you care about America and all the things that we see taking place, you certainly want to get a copy of Michael's forthcoming book, Speechless. You can order it now. So far, it's still on Amazon, but I'm sure that it can be purchased wherever books are sold. And it is up to us, the American people, to look deeply and closely at what is taking place in our country. It's not too late for us to turn things around, but we must understand the tactics of the political left. We must educate ourselves, and we must realize that this did not take place overnight. Some of us were asleep at the wheel, and so I strongly encourage you to educate yourself, become prepared, and stand up and push back. It's not over yet. And I will see you next week in another episode of Conversations.